Hey everyone, welcome to Indexer Office Hours number 23. Hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a pretty basic agenda. A lot of people are either on vacation or they're in Paris for ETHCC. So expecting this to be a relatively quiet one. Now let's get forward up into the stage. But for those of us that are still here, we'll go through typical node watch. Then there's maybe 3 items I wanted to highlight to everyone. And then maybe we will open things up for people to have an open discussion if there's something to discuss. And if not, we'll finish early. So let's just kick off with our usual node watch. Nothing has changed in terms of the schedule for the London hard fork. Still tentatively August the 4th for block 12,965,000. We have seen some client release candidates in the last 6 or 7 days. So Geth is now at 1.10.5, enabling the hard fork at the block I mentioned before. They've redesigned the transaction pool within the node, specifically for the 1559 fee market. There's a bunch of other changes there that you can also read. I've put the link in the notes, which are in office hours chat. If you scroll up in there, you'll find I've put the notes that I'm talking through there. Open Ethereum is now on RC4. Again, same deal. The London activation block is set for mainnet. I've been running RC4 for a few days myself now, maybe 3 or 4 days. And it's been running completely fine against about 20 subgraphs. So I've upgraded my second node as well, and that's been fine too. No issues at all. Aragon's also incremented to 3rd of July alpha, released 5 days ago or so. Same deal again, ready for the London hard fork. And in the last week or so, I think a bunch of new grants were announced, and Aragon is one of the recipients of a grant. And in tandem with that, I'm going to start a testing work group, which will just maybe be a half-hour call, probably similar time to office hours, but on a different day, where we can all get together and talk about what we've done so far with Aragon. And the ultimate objective of that group would be that whoever is a regular on that call and has been spending the time on Aragon, we all, work together to get to a point where we feel like we can use Aragon with confidence on mainnet, and we all do so around about the same time. Right. Any questions about the London upgrade or anything like that before we move on to some awareness pieces? Slim, can you do me a favor? And if you see any of the regulars appear in chat, if you can give them an invite, just spam them with an invite when they come in.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Right, so 3 pieces for Indexer awareness. It's been a busy week, I think, in terms of what's going on in the Indexer world. And there's a few things I think we should definitely talk about. The first one, there's been some rigorous discussion around this morning. I put a tweet out a couple of days ago to bring awareness to this mechanism within the network that allows the delegator to close an indexer's allocations once that allocation lifetime hits its 29th epoch. Wayne Wayner, one of the members of our indexing community, raised the issue with other indexers that were potentially also seeing this happen. And what it looks like is one individual person delegating to indexers that have some of these 29 plus epoch allocations and then closing them with a 0x0 POI, which means that all rewards for that subgraph or that allocation are sacrificed, right? So it's brought up a question around whether or not this is working as intended, right? So some view this as, this is the way it's supposed to work. indexers should be on top of their allocations and managing them within the 28 epochs anyway. And others think that it's potentially malicious behavior, that they shouldn't be able to close it maybe with a 0x0 POI, or maybe there should be some sort of warning system before that event happens. So I guess I'd like to open the conversation up to everyone here. I know Chris has had a good discussion with another indexer around this morning, so aware of Chris's position on this. Is there anyone else who wants to, talk through this dynamic and what you think about it?
I was wondering what was meant. I caught up on the discussion earlier. I was wondering what was meant by a warning system, because in my eyes, the warning is already the awareness of how long your epochs have been open for, and this is something that indexers need to be aware of themselves already. It seems like just duplicating in my eyes, if you get me.
Yeah, I have a very similar opinion on that matter personally. 28 days is a long time, right? And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that an indexer is managing their allocations within that window. It's a long time. It's a month, right? In theory, you could be touching your indexer 12 times a year, thereabouts, right? Extreme example, but I don't think that we should be promoting passive indexing. There should be some consequences if you are not tending to your crops, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I mean, I saw Cone mentioned to Edux Oracle Miner about having something added to his dashboard so that you can see what is your current longest one that's open, and that would be good at a glance. I mean, you can still see how long all your allocations have been open on something like GraphScan. But I mean, if you want to at a glance, something like this would be fine. But in reality, like you say, I mean, you could just be hitting your indexer 12 times a year or whatever, because I think the majority of indexers don't even have that many allocations open at once from casual observation. This would be more of a problem down the line, I guess. But again, this is something I feel that indexers should already be managing somehow.
I think the point is that there is no incentive right now for indexers to close failed subgraphs, because like the one in question, it paid pretty well. I think 4 times above average. And in this case, this mechanism was used to punish indexers in lieu of any other method to force them to close their allocations. I think this is pretty okay.
I was going to say, I think that's a separate issue, because from what I saw, this has happened on multiple subgraphs to multiple indexes. So I think you're on the right lines of what you're getting at there, is that maybe some of these indexers didn't have say the open subgraph, for example, you would need to manually close this, and obviously I don't know if they thought their agent was going to handle it or what, but again, this says to me that if they're going into 30 plus days, 29 plus epochs, that there is some potentially either they have problems with their infrastructure, or there's some, as Jim puts it, passive indexing going along there. And I saw someone else raise a point in chat earlier about this, that at the end of the day, the service is to provide index data, and if you're not managing to catch up to that within 29 epochs, then if we're weighting things more towards the future and queries, you wouldn't actually be providing the services intended, but still expecting the rewards.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of responsibility that needs to be taken around these decisions that are made, right? I understand that we are, we are early in terms of the tools we have available to us today to do things like score the complexity of a subgraph and understand how long it might take to sync, right? So one of the things that I've seen come up in the conversation is around what if an indexer starts allocates to a subgraph, and that subgraph's going to take longer than 28 days to sync? Should they be punished for that? And at the end of the day, and I'm actually in this situation right now, right, with a specific subgraph. That subgraph made me crazy rates for 24 hours, and now it makes me nothing. And I'm maybe a week away from actually syncing that subgraph. So do I keep holding on to that subgraph despite it making me poor returns because it made me good returns earlier? Or do I OXO it and sacrifice the money, knowing that the opportunity cost means it's not worth it, and I should just take that capital and apply it somewhere else, right? So I think part of the issue here is that I feel like, generally speaking, we need to take more responsibility for our actions, and if that means making a loud noise about fixing the problems, I think that's part of the solution too, right? In this case, I think it's working as intended. However, we do need better tools for things like scoring the complexity of a subgraph and the quality of a subgraph, this sort of thing. And those things are coming, right? There's the gas costing piece coming down the line for subgraphs. There's the feature piece coming down the line for subgraphs. The tools are coming, they're just not here yet.
I have a question about check. Like, is it possible? I'm not super familiar with that check POI script, but one concern I have is for long-running subgraphs. Like, if you there's some problem that you run into when you're indexing, and then you get to the end and you realize your POI is mismatched from everyone else's, and it's is there a way to partway through indexing be oh, I'm way off? That seems probably not. You just have to wait till you get to the end and see if you're matching what everyone else is reporting.
It depends if other people have submitted POIs in the blocks that you've already synced. So unless there was some network of indexers who are sort of spitting out their POIs every epoch and they're being shared somewhere, you don't really have that information to answer that question, Nate. I mean, it's doable, right? Maybe it's something that's done in the future. But as things stand today, you're sort of reliant on whether or not another indexer has made an on-chain attestation, a POI, for one of the blocks that you already have. So it's kind of complex to try and do that in the midst of the sync. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's basically impossible to do this because allocations are closed within the last 6 months or something. But no, not even. When you have a subgraph that you sync up for the last 2 years now, then you won't find any POIs on chain for anything but the last 2 months maybe. So you basically have to sync it until the end, or there is a better tool developed. Maybe a grant for this would be nice.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
I feel like there has to be some kind of takeaway by indexers with this, that perhaps not all of the data that you index will ultimately be rewarded, because this situation just shows that it is perhaps worth doing the sidechain off-chain syncing. I'm not sure how the parameters referred to, can't remember. But making use of features like this so that you're not aping into something and potentially getting stuck in the way you are now, Jim. I had the same when loads of new subgraphs were being spun up a couple of weeks ago. I hopped on USDC and a couple of others, and then by that time the next day it was pretty apparent that this was not going to be a good earner moving forward, so I had to forfeit the past day's earnings on those. And I feel like this is part of basic strategy for us, though. All of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Cohen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I haven't been able to read the entire chat yet, but I think that you have 28 days to close is not how I see it. There's 28 days. That's the natural lifetime of an allocation, and then you have one epoch at a time to be able to close it correctly. When all these new subgraphs came, there was a lot of changes, but I think we'll reach a new point of stability where it will become natural again to let subgraphs run for their lifetime of 28 epochs. Otherwise, our gas costs would rocket quite a bit. After which there is a full epoch to close it. Some of the comments make me a bit concerned that it's going to be harder for new subgraphs to join, because If everything becomes a risk, why would you jump on something unknown, or worse with the 28 days? Who is going to want to sync the new Uniswap, SushiSwap, all those that you can sort of sense, okay, this is going to be a very heavy one to index, and you might not make it within 28 days, even if you throw the biggest hardware at it. So I'm having a bit of a concern that it might sort of thwart new subgraphs or the big subgraphs for being picked up, basically.
You can by using the off-chain subgraphs flag and hopefully via some programmatic API in the future, you can instruct indexer agent to have GraphNode index specific deployment IDs without actually allocating to them. So the constraint that a subgraph must sync to the chain head within the max allocation lifetime is not real. So for super expensive subgraphs where you might be concerned about the sync time, you can just pre-sync it before allocating. And then the other thing I would say is that all of this behavior, indexer behavior, in particular, given we're in indexer office hours, is subject to market behavior. So if there is strong demand, either in terms of signal and therefore creating indexing rewards as incentives, or through query fees for a new subgraph, that there may be risk associated with allocating to it, but the rewards will be commensurate to that. So if lots of other indexes are risk averse and they don't allocate, or they choose to wait it out or whatever, then those that move early and take on that risk, if they follow a good strategy, will likely be rewarded for that. So there are a lot of market forces that compensate for the kind of things that you describe being worrying about, Cohen.
Yeah. At the same time, you won't know for every subgraph. You will suspect Uniswap, but what if tomorrow something launches and it's equally heavy? You might not know. And at the same time, if that's sort of the direction we're taking in, why not go to the change of saying, okay, you can only get indexing rewards for any subgraph if you are fully synced? Why sort of have this very weird mixed scenario where it's very difficult to know what to expect?
I mean, I don't see how only rewarding fully synced subgraphs makes the situation any better. At least now, it's the indexer's choice whether they take the risk on of being allocated and therefore receiving rewards prior to being fully synced. And that decision is entirely in the indexer's hands. And so if that means as an indexing community, we need to adjust our allocation workflow so that by default, we have some mechanism of pre-syncing via some evolved off-chain subgraphs flag or something like that, then that becomes our new workflow. And we only take on the allocation risk that comes with reward when we're confident that we're ready to do so. And hey, we may even be able to be rewarded pre-chain head. And I don't see the issue with that.
I have to say I agree with all that. And I think it's these kind of considerations that are going to make the more engaged indexers, able to compete in the market as well.
I think the clear message right now, as we stand and having had this conversation, is that we all need to be making use of the off-chain subgraphs feature right now. That's the most useful tool we have in our toolkit to quickly assess how long it's going to take to index a subgraph, right? So personally, my workflow I've already started doing this, but my workflow is going to include doing that first, right? So it's relatively easy for an indexer to drop that, a new subgraph IPFS hash into their agent, observe it for a while and see how long it's taking to sync, right? Once it catches up to wherever it's got data in the blocks. So that's the first point of taking ownership of the problem. In the future, like I've mentioned, we have the gas costing for subgraphs, and we have feature matrices or matrices for subgraphs coming. But that's down the line somewhere. That's in GIP right now, I believe. Yeah, Ford, did you have something to say? I saw you light up a minute ago.
I think you guys have pretty well covered the kind of trade-off space here. I think one thing I was going to add is just that, as you guys are affecting the marketplace for data, it might make sense to make sure that you're, only indexing really heavy subgraphs if there's enough signal on them. So the developers of these subgraph deployments and the curators have a bit of a responsibility here to make sure that things that are going to be expensive for you guys have heavy enough of a signal that there's the incentive there.
Definitely. And we're already seeing those sort of communications relationships starting to build between the curator community and the indexer community. Is something I'm noticing that's coming up now. Josh from Streaming Fast actually brought it up today on another channel. It's the question of understanding query demand, and indexers only. There's some sort of segue here, but indexers are insularly have some information about query demand, but nobody's really sharing that information right now, and it seems like curators seem to really want that information. Has anyone been thinking about this or watching the dynamic between curators and indexers in regards to query pricing or demand? Hey, we have Data Nexus. Come join us, Data Nexus.
In a way, this query demand is what curators should project, right? But on another hand, when you close allocations, you can also see how many query fees were collected on each allocation. So that's an indication.
Hey, Derek, how you doing? Welcome.
Doing well, guys. How are you?
Good. So did you hear my little bit there about curation? Be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that relationship and how you guys are currently trying to assess demand on the curation side for Signal.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys have to forgive me. I'm outside right now, so you might hear some wind in the background.
No
big
problem.
thing that we're working to establish is, from the curation side, what is going to be a fair market total signal? We've taken a lot of effort to, if you look at Audius, for example, so it's a great project and something that, we all love. It's produced 3 GRT in query fees over the last 30 days. Compare that to something like UMA, who is currently our top producer for query fees, and you can see the imbalance. Now, from what we've seen, it looks like Audius is self-signaling on their own subgraph. So that's something that, as curators, we're trying to factor into the equation of, okay, when Yearn is not signaling on their own subgraph. Badger DAO, we believe, just started to signal on their DAO. Audius has, I think, 100,000 GRT signal on their own subgraph, which from their project, that allows them to ensure that they have the security and stability for indexers to support it. But it doesn't have the query fee to make me interested to signal on it, because I get no benefit from the indexer rewards. I am purely query fee focused. So that's one thing that we're working on. But some of the troubles that we run into, especially with the newer ones, is we don't really have any access to what all the queries are, or what the query volume looks like for some of these newer guys. So I'm sure, kind of annoying in the Discord channels and stuff like that. I'm trying to mitigate the amount of people running into the indexer channels, but just trying to provide some response back to the curator crew of like, yes, Aux is a big project. We expect that to have high volume and high traffic. Has it started yet? We don't know. So I do think having some type of a feedback loop between indexers that are picking up some of these newer guys that we don't have the analytics on can help us better gauge what will be fair market signal, and thus provide a better equilibrium for you guys and your indexing rewards, because that is ultimately our goal. It'll incentivize us once the queries start coming in, and it'll incentivize you guys to have, a stable, fair market.
It's like a chicken or egg type sort of situation, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Go ahead, Joseph.
I was going to say it's gonna be a chicken and egg type of situation.
Yeah.
And
Go ahead,
I
Chris.
think on the curator side, it's our job to wear the speculation prediction role. We get rewarded for when we do it successfully, and we take the risk for when we do it unsuccessfully. So initially, when a subgraph is first posted, we look through, we do our best to verify, is it coming from a reputable source? If so, then we do analytics on what the project looks like. And just for a little bit of insight on what we're doing, we're going to take the website and look at, if it's DeFi, we're going to look at, what's their liquidity pool look like? How much do they have deposited? What is their website's Alexa ranking? That gives us an indication of how many people are actually going to their website and engaging with it. All of these factors are non-query factors that we use to guesstimate what we expect it will be. And then once we've put our initial signal and indexers have synced it up, then at that point, there's kind of this delay in feedback of like, okay, well, were we right? And we have about a 28-day delay on that. And so right now we're in the middle of those 28 days where we don't know if we were right yet. And this is round one of being right or wrong.
Yeah, and the only way to close that loop is either to A, get data from indexers on demand, or B, indexers are closing their allocations on a more frequent basis, so you're getting the updated information in the subgraph, right? So that continues to be a problem, a challenge, past, into steady state. Even it's not just a problem for now; that's a problem in steady state as well.
I think a question that comes to the front of my mind is the current method that the network executes payment, the allocation exchange and so on, is obviously going to be replaced with Vector at some point. I'm wondering whether that configuration will produce some on-chain records that may, give insight prior to the allocation closure and, subsequent voucher redemption. So that's the first thought, and I don't know if anyone here knows enough about the Vector integration to be able to answer that. The second one is, I've spoken to a few people in the ecosystem about quite a wide range of challenges that could be solved by indexes sharing data with one another. And in this case, with the wider ecosystem, I think there's quite a broad and exciting scope there, and we could I'm sure have many a session exploring that. But just as a kind of very simple idea of what that could be, I don't know how many people here are familiar with ETHstats.io, which was a project, I think an open source project released by Alethio and Consensus. Where Ethereum node operators could effectively opt in to sharing certain telemetry about their node, and essentially reporting that to a central server that ran the ETHstats.io site, and you could kind of receive aggregated telemetry on all of these nodes that had opted in. We could potentially, just as a really simple step towards solving some of these problems, do something similar to that, where indexes could run, some little open source sidecar within their existing stack and have it report telemetry to be aggregated in a kind of central dashboard for ecosystem participants to view in real time. And that could include things like query volumes across indexed subgraphs.
Yeah, that's a very interesting or compelling idea. I'm just looking at eStats right now.
I'm just wondering if we need something new for that. We already have Prometheus, which has all that sort of data.
Yeah, I mean, the way you do it could be any number of ways, right? The way you do it, if I remember, with eStats is there's specific clients have the eStats piece of code built into them, and it's a flag, right? You set the flag to configure your identity or whatever, and whether you want to report to eStats or not.
Yeah, they
I
also
vaguely
have a
remember doing
little.
that.
They also have a little sidecar you can point at any RPC interface.
Yeah, it would need to be simple, very simple, if we were to do something like that.
But yeah, certainly, Cohen. I think, if that was like a super simple little sidecar, it would make sense to fetch that information out of Prometheus and then forward it on.
I mean, one of the earlier questions was always about how much total network traffic is there, and a while back I've been thinking of, okay, what if I set up a public Grafana where indexes can opt in to submit their data for the query volume. Sounds like query volume is still basically the metric that curators are after. Could be fairly straightforward without needing to build a lot of new stuff.
Yep, that's certainly a possibility. I think we should probably explore this more on another office hours in more detail.
If anyone is particularly interested in indexer information sharing, yeah, please do reach out. It'd be great to connect with folks who would be interested in trying something like that, especially when it's early.
Okay, where are we at? That was an epic discussion there, covering quite a number of topics. I think I want to change the strategy here a little bit, because I know we have a couple of people who have joined the call for specific topics. Now, the second topic out of three, I think I was going to talk, or at least raise awareness of a couple of things. So I'll do that first, then we'll move on to something that's similar but different. I just wanted to make people aware that Aderx, who you might know as Oracle Miner, has updated his Graph Protocol API, and he's moved from Infura to Aragon, which has given him, his API quite a significant performance improvement, up to 3-fold improvement in processing times. If you're an indexer with a lot of active allocations, he's also introduced a new endpoint that allows us to check if a subgraph requires trace features. I don't have any more detail on what checks he's doing beyond call handlers, but you can plug in an IPFS hash, and it will tell you by looking at the metadata whether that subgraph requires a trace-enabled node or not. The links are all in the public notes I've put out there in the office hours chat if you want to look at that in any more detail. The third thing I wanted to raise awareness on was I published a subgraph selection guide last week on Friday. That's also in the notes. The guide generally sticks to the more sanitary ways of selecting subgraphs. So, can you afford to based on transaction fees? Can you afford to based on your revenue? Do you want to signal weight? Do you want to stake weight? Are you a large indexer who has to be very careful about their allocations? Or are you a smaller indexer who can choose any of these strategies and just follow them to a T? But I had a question today from Adam and Pranav around, how are indexers thinking about subgraph selection? So, Pranav, welcome to the call. I want to make sure and dive into this a little bit, because we've got quite a lot of active talking indexers on the call today. You there, Pranav? You need to unmute yourself if you're there.
Hey, Jim. Can you repeat your question? I'm really sorry. I was lost in the.
Adam pinged me earlier to say that you were interested to know how indexers are thinking about subgraph selection.
Right,
Um,
right. So one particular thing that came into like my being a part of, a lot of curation groups that people are running through or watching the network very lively, was that I have seen like, many curators, as a random subgraph comes, they just ape into that subgraph, increase their stake just to think that, more people will stake, it will increase their particular share, and then they'll get out. So in a way, curators are not doing what they are meant to do for the network, that is signal the indexers that this particular subgraph should be indexed based on its valuation and everything, rather just looking into their particular share and then getting in and getting out very early. So what I think is, right now I'm just trying to understand what indexers, since they cannot maybe for short term like early indexing, they cannot look into curation signals, what exactly are they basing their indexing on. And this argument is not just based on like this particular thought, but rather also something like curation on the curve subgraph right now on the network is around 280 kgrt, while just about 10 to 20 indexers are indexing it, while on the other hand the third one, which is pooled together, has 200 kgrt, but about 40 I would say 40 indexers indexing it. So like just wanted to have this conversation around and see what comes up.
I have my opinions and thoughts on this. I put most of them in the selection guide. So I'd be interested to hear from anyone who hasn't yet shared their opinions on subgraph selection and wants to do so. There is no wrong answer, guys.
Hi, how are you guys?
Hey, Juan.
I just
Juan!
I think the curve one has been denied rewards, if I recall correctly. It's one of the subgraphs that have been flagged by the SAO. Is that correct, Jim? I think so.
I think they have released a new. They did a subgraph version upgrade, and the new version removes all networking compatible features. So it's just the individual deployment that gets denied by the SAO, right? Not the named subgraph.
Yeah, it's on the deployment basis. I guess Ariel could probably.
Cool.
More
Yeah. So
about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
The latest
the Oracle works at the deployment level. So if they upgraded, it means there's a new hash that will be checked by the Oracle, and if it's good, it's going to work.
So trying to not steer away from the question, I guess the answer to that one, Pranab, is most likely that some indexers, even though there's a lot of signal on that subgraph, some indexers also did some research and realized that, hey, that subgraph isn't generating any indexing rewards. Right now, query fees are pretty insignificant, unfortunately. So from a revenue perspective, as an indexer, it's probably not as good as a subgraph to be indexing if there's no indexing rewards. So even if it has a ton of curation, it might not be worth indexing, or at least allocating a lot of GRT towards it. But it's just like optimization of revenue from the indexer.
This goes on the curator side as well, right? So, at the moment, it's indexers who are very, very in touch with what's going on the subgraphs, whether they're healthy, whether they've been, kiboshed by the Oracle or not, whether they've had a fatal error, whether they're complex to index or not. It's indexers that sort of retain all that information, although we do now have a shared channel, like subgraph health channel, where everybody can contribute to. I had always assumed sort of naively that indexers just follow the signal. It's that simple. That's all we do. We don't have to think too much about, what's really going on in the detail of the network. But right now, the reality is we do have to watch very, very carefully what's going on in the network. Now, maybe that won't be so relevant in the steady state of the protocol. But right now, because of the volatility in signal and also the fact that signal is not reacting how you might expect it to in a sort of theoretical situation like Curve, for example, the signal's still there, right? People aren't leaving the subgraph, they're not budging. What I would expect in steady state is for the signal to be moving before the indexers do, potentially, if the curators are curating the registry, so to speak, which is very, very difficult for them to do right now because the information channels and the best practices, they just aren't there.
One of the things that I think might help in sort of in our workflow is that in the Explorer or in GraphScan or whatever way that we can sort of, when we do the triage, that we can sort of say, okay, I want to fully ignore this subgraph for the future, that you can hide the things that you say, okay, this, like for example, the bot trap stuff, it keeps showing up very high because of course you don't want to index that. But there are similar cases of subgraphs that you have discarded for some reason, or another reason might be that it's broken. Another reason might be that you've investigated it and you think, yeah, this is not really a good one to sync. That you don't need to keep going over a list of, I think, almost 120 subgraphs by now to keep going over it. Because one of the problems is that when you sort by relative signal, some of the crappy ones, so to say, they keep popping up high because obviously people are either ignoring it or either leaving it. So I think that would be a rather helpful feature, that we can sort of have a personal profile where we can select and ignore.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of like tooling for the indexers. But yeah, you also bring up a good point. Like, for example, there are some subgraphs that are failing. And as an indexer, there is like a kind of gray area on whether or not you can actually allocate towards those subgraphs. One of the main examples, I guess, it's Opin, which it's not entirely clear whether it's safe to allocate towards those, because you cannot really provide a valid POI for them on the latest block that you close it, epoch that you close it, actually. So yeah, there are many like different things that are quite on the gray side of things right now. But I guess like when the protocol matures a little bit and the arbitration charter is like we all know what we can do and what we cannot do, things will start to stabilize a bit. I guess that's one of the other reasons, like indexers are not indexing everything that has signal.
Right. What I see as per your conversation is that like curators should know everything about the network, the subgraphs in specific, but instead they the indexers end up to even do the job of curators, which is actually like currently the network is settling down on. And I guess there are definitely some measures that I guess can be taken beyond just let's say Opine is the team which is the real one behind the subgraph being deployed on their end. That's true, but the curators should know the information that Juan did share, and they should know it before the indexers. So there definitely has to be some kind of tooling that I'm imagining, and yeah, that's one point that's really brought up well. Yeah,
but it's not only. Go ahead.
Go ahead, John. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think the problem is not with tooling. I think the problem is actually with incentives. So curators has much more incentives to curate early and then sell their shares at profit than to actually do the work and verify if a subgraph is going to generate query fees or not. If you look at UMA, the highest query fees generator, I think they generated something around 28K since the inception. And if you divide it among all the curators, that's basically nothing. So the incentives of curators lies within creating early and selling their shares. And this is how we are looking at allocations on subgraph. That curation might change at some point. So we're going to look at subgraph that we know that has value from our experience and which optimize indexing rewards based on curation as well. So until the incentives of curators change, I think we should still be doing this kind of work ourselves as indexers.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with right now are to do with incentives. And I think part of the problem on the signaling side is that the actual amount of signal out there compared to the number of subgraphs is very small. And Juan, we spoke about this before. We need an ocean of signal in order to support the boats upon it, right? The subgraphs, without them being impacted hugely every time one subgraph fails or one subgraph has some kind of pull event on it. And that only comes with more signal and more subgraphs coming into the protocol, and stake at the end of the day, right? The economic security piece as well.
Yeah, but like, I guess it's kind of like something that really needs to mature, because for more signal to be poured into curation, you would expect that it will happen once query fees start to ramp up, right? So once there's the actual economic incentive to curate, other than like just participating on the bonding curve, I guess things should start to look a little bit better. So it's kind of like, yeah, it needs time. Like time should solve this. But there's also like another thing that is not like, curators aren't expected to do all the hard work. Indexers also need to choose which subgraphs they stake towards, they allocate towards. Curators kind of like do the first, I guess, at least in my opinion, do the first pass to basically distinguish those that are actually worth indexing, that are like cool, that have good data, that are actually going to be used and signal towards them. And then the indexers end up like choosing whether or not to index one or the other based on like many different things. They might be running a small operation and just want to index a few subgraphs because they don't really have the money to sustain the ether costs. Or maybe they just like have a massive operation and just like allocate towards anyone because they just want to support as many subgraphs as possible and generate as much query fees as possible. There are many like differences between indexers that might explain why some index one or another subgraph. So it's not just that anything that's going to be signaled will be indexed instantaneously by the whole network, because not everyone on the network is actually on the same playing field, I guess.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the big messages of the article I wrote is, the Ethereum piece plays a huge part in how indexers behave. And as soon as you start scaling your number of allocations and the frequency of allocations, your costs go through the roof. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, as Joseph said, incentives matter, and incentives are what drive behavior, and incentives are currently dominated, and I think for a long time will be dominated by indexing rewards. I think you could argue that it is the design intent of having the clear separation of concerns and role between the indexer and curator actor makes a lot of sense. And if indexers also need to be evaluating subgraphs, then that kind of just spreads one particular actor too thin. And my feeling is that curators are really the ones that should be determining which subgraphs get indexed. And I certainly don't think we're close to this point, but I think what I'm thinking that we're aiming towards is a market where indexes do, for the most part, just blindly stake based on stake weight or something approximating stake weight if they want to take advantage of imbalances or something like that. And yeah, there are these like operational parameters that are important to, the number of subgraphs that they choose to stake on, and depending on the operational costs they can sustain, that number will vary. But the methodology there in my mind is like sort available subgraphs by signal and then truncate that list at some point depending on operational cost tolerance.
Yeah, that's how I started out, right? That's what I was doing from the beginning. And then when you could see the stake weighting optimization sort of exercise and how much more that would get you for yourself and for your delegators, then it's very difficult to try and just maintain goodwill in the network, right? Because there's profit to be made and other people are making it. And it's nothing to do with quality of subgraph. It's purely the maths of where the stake is and where the signal is. And that's not necessarily where it should be today.
And that's why it's so important that curators, really do that job really well. And like, I don't think that much of that responsibility should fall onto indexers.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree on that point. If we look at things from a higher perspective, we know that the graph is a permissionless network. Anyone could publish subgraphs. And the question would be, who would bootstrap these subgraphs? How would we know that this subgraph is important to index? And if the indexer should do all the job, it's going to get harder and harder for indexers. So that's why the curator comes in to bootstrap some subgraphs to signal the importance of this subgraphs. And then the indexer would say, all right, this subgraph has some curation on, let's index it. So I think like curators are the ones who need to do all the works, and indexers should only come after and say, okay, this is it, and I'm going to allocate to this one. But right now, this has introduced a lot of risk for small indexers. If indexers follow signal and they allocate to a big number of subgraphs, then this signal starts shifting from one subgraph to another because curators are more incentivized to sell their shares at profit. And small indexers are going to have more problems to keep up. And I think at the end, they're going to stick with a few number of subgraphs that known to keep the signal on. And it's going to be the large indexers who's going to try to allocate to subgraph and try to actually follow the signal.
Given the current information asymmetries and amount of tokens the indexers have, how do you guys feel about, or have you seen indexers signaling on subgraphs to try to affect the proportions there and help optimize the signal levels?
It's not entirely possible, actually, because most indexers are running on vesting contracts, and for curation, you need to have like liquid GRT. So yeah, you could.
I'm not sure that's like a real restriction.
Yeah, it's something that I've dabbled with a tiny bit and considered, but the risks are just really high, particularly when you have the kind of the bonding curve is really steep, and there isn't any kind of bootstrap pooling mechanism, so there's just a huge amount of like automated front running activity, and like it's very difficult to do that without placing your GRT at significant risk, and the kind of the financial profile, like the return profile of that activity is very different to indexing. So that's definitely put me off.
Absolutely. Interesting. Yeah. Something I was just thinking about while you guys were talking. Another thing I wanted to add, because we only have a couple minutes left, is that this bootstrapping problem is one thing that we're doing is trying to assist with migration partners and make sure that they are aware of this bootstrapping problem and are preparing for it and having access to GRT to signal so that they can signal heavily and just help bootstrap this curation market that it's difficult for curators to do on their own without cooperating with the developers and the teams themselves.
A problem I thought about that, maybe someone else thought about it as well, is that I could actually program a bot to look to be always monitoring curation on a certain subgraph. And let's say someone like a curator, number one, this curator comes and signal GRT on a subgraph. The bot will know that someone right now is signaling. The bot will pay very, very, very high fees to signal before this person, and then will actually signal before this curator. And the moment that the signal of this curator gets accepted, the bot has made a huge profit and sell the curation. So if the subgraph developers want to be the first one to also curate on the subgraph, they need to increase very, very much high fees in order to know that a bot can't actually get there before them. So this is also a problem.
You can do it with a batch contract interaction. Yeah, and there has been testing of this on chain if you look through the transactions. So I think that problem will be solved. It's also worth saying that there's quite a lot of active discussion on the forum. A lot of it coming from the curation community, which has been awesome to see, trying to explore some ideas to solve some of these issues, and including, bootstrap, having a kind of bootstrap pool for the curve and a bunch of other stuff. So if anyone's interested, definitely have a look at the forums.
Yeah, sure. I will take a look at it. Didn't have the time yet.
Okay, good discussions, guys. I think we're out of time. So I think we'll leave it at that unless anyone has anything for the last 2 minutes. Okay.
Maybe I want to add.
Go ahead, Seb.
Like the most practical approach that I see right now as an indexer to is not be too greedy. Like ignore all the ones that pay you very good and try to see what's like the average return that you get for $1 million allocated, and just like try to balance that a little bit. Like in reality, if you pick one of the bigger subgraphs as a small indexer, it actually doesn't really matter which one you allocate to, because the big indexers, they will balance everything out so that everyone earns the same amount of money on almost every subgraph, at least like in the top group of the subgraphs that are very trustworthy. So if you don't get too fancy, then you also don't get stuck on something that you get rug pulled on. Like SushiSwap just lost a lot of signal. That was one of my mistakes, to allocate to it and start taking on like 1 or 2 weeks of syncing, and right the next day rewards cut in half or something. Yeah, not doing that so quick again.
It's tempting, isn't it? It's very tempting. I think a lot of us have learned our lessons, though, over the last couple of weeks on that. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour, guys. Thanks, everybody, for your contributions.
I kind of
It's been a great
0x0 after
session.
one day. That's not a biggie.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you next week on Office Hours. See you again. Bye.
Bye, guys.